I think pricing in the real world is a lot more like a game of poker. Everybody's looking at the strength of their hand, trying to guess at the strength of their opponent's hand. Everybody's bluffing. Buyers are trying to hide how much they're willing to pay. Sellers are trying to hide how low they're willing to accept. And so for me, the interest, the love affair with this area of business started when I saw the intrigue and the mystery that surrounded something that on paper looked really simple and straightforward, which is an exchange of money for value.
Welcome to the Agency Profit Podcast, a show dedicated to going deep space on agency operations, which is just as nerdy as it sounds. I'm your host, Marcel I'm the CEO of Parakeeto, a firm that helps digital and creative agencies measure and improve their profitability. Join me as I interview some of the smartest thought leaders and agency owners in our space and go deep into operations, metrics, and all the other things you need to get right so you can spend less time worrying about operations and more time executing on your vision. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Agency Profit Podcast. I am very excited today to be joined by, dare I call you, a veteran of the pricing industry, 25 plus years as a pricing geek, over 1,000 companies served in terms of this pricing magic that you've developed, over $1 billion in incremental profits generated for your clients. Casey Brown, Boost Pricing, best-selling author of Fearless Pricing, TED speaker. I mean, the rap sheet is incredible. Casey, I'm so excited to have you join us today on the show.
Thanks so much, Marcel. I'm delighted. Been looking forward to it.
Me too. We're going to talk about something super important, which is, I think a lot of people listening to this show have had the revelation of, I should be charging more. That's step one. Step two is actually doing it and actually getting clients to give you that higher price point. And I think you've got some very, very deep wisdom on how to make that second transition, which tends to be the harder one. So we're going to get into that. But before we do, I'd love to have you, in your own words, describe what you do and who you serve.
Sure. So Pricing Geek is my word for anybody who's listening and thinks maybe Marcel got to dig in. I use that word with pride. I'm a pricing geek, have been for 25 years. I find pricing the most fascinating area of business. It's an intersection of art and science, people and process, data and psychology. And I have a deep well of passion to help people command the prices they truly deserve. And so our firm, Boost Pricing, and everything that I'm doing in terms of content creation, the book, everything we're putting out is really aligned behind that mission of helping people command the prices they deserve. We have training products in all kinds of ways we help people get there, but that's what we're really about.
Incredible. And you are correct in that we use the term geek and nerd in definitely a very nice way here on the show. That's a term of endearment for all of us here at the Agency Profit Podcast. So with that, I mean, you've been in the game for quite some time. What initially got you interested in pricing after having started in chemical engineering?
Yeah. So I was an engineer, as you just mentioned, and I love the technical and analytical aspects of that. I love data. Excel is my jam. I really like that stuff. But once I started in the working world, I really discovered that, I just got interested in what was happening in the front of the business. I was stuffed way back in the lab doing experiments, and I wanted to know who's buying our products, why, what do they care about, what's important. And the best way to get closer to the business, to that sort of the commercial end of the business at that time, I was working at GE in the Jack Welch days, was to go into Six Sigma. And so I became an early Six Sigma black belt and did a rotation in pricing and just fell in love with it. The real world of pricing, like if you ever read an econ textbook, there's a simple demand curve where, you charge less, you sell more, you charge more, you sell less. And the real world's a lot different. There's a lot of negotiation. I think pricing in the real world's a lot more like a game of poker. Everybody's looking at the strength of their hand, trying to guess at the strength of their opponent's hand. Everybody's bluffing. Buyers are trying to hide how much they're willing to pay. Sellers are trying to hide how low they're willing to accept. And so for me, the interest, the love affair with this area of business started when I saw the intrigue and the mystery that surrounded something that on paper looked really simple and straightforward, which is an exchange of money for value.
It's so funny you bring up sort of the traditional economic theory around this, which is that there is just like a inverse correlation between price and demand. And certainly, like, if you crop out infinitely and look at commodities, that is somewhat true. But then you have the exception to that even in the most commoditized industries possible, like water, for example, right? We have like liquid death and flow. How does premium water exist? And that is sort of evidence that this is just not true. In some cases, raising the price of something dramatically increases the demand because of how humans behave, which is not at all as predictable as traditional economics would have us believe, which is why I think these sort of emerging fields in economics, like social economics, psychological economic theory, is really interesting. This gets me fascinated in like how you arrived here, because I think in our discussions you had started doing more traditional pricing consulting, more focused on like how much should a person charge, how to identify the ideal price. And then what you really found over time was that the more pronounced problem that you wanted to solve was the psychology around actually executing on that. So what's the backstory, how you got to this specific focus?
Sure. I can't help before I answer that to go back and put an exclamation point on something you said about the economic theory real quick. I wrote a blog called The Lies We Learned in Economics Class, where I kind of take on this issue of the demand curve. And in particular, you serve the agency world, we serve professional service firms and agencies. Very often there is a direct relationship between price and demand, not an inverse one. So it's exactly opposite because of something called the price quality effect, which is where we infer quality from price. It's expensive, it must be good. It's cheap, it must be garbage. So the more that an agency charges, the more we infer that the value and the quality that they provide is. And so the breakdown of those things is also really fascinating to me. So sorry to circle back to that, but to come to more directly to your question, like how did I get here? So yes, as I mentioned, I'm an engineer and I'm an Excel person and I love data. And my early exposure to pricing was in corporate America, where the strategic design of a pricing strategy and the analytical support that went into that was very much that was kind of what I cut my teeth on as a pricing expert in the beginning. And when I first started my firm, I had the idea of bringing that same kind of expertise to the middle market, things like elasticity calculations and segmentation analysis and all this really sort of dry, arcane pricing geekery. And I did some of that in the early days of my business. And I think it was candidly, modestly helpful. Only modestly. Now, I believe very much in the quality of the stuff I was building, the pricing models and so forth that I was building. But then the CEO that had hired me would put that pricing model in the hands of the sales team, whose job it was to go communicate and defend that model and go communicate and defend higher prices. And they couldn't do it or wouldn't do it. And this bothered me a great deal because I knew the model was great. So I developed as a second offering some training that could go alongside with the strategy that would help get the hearts and minds of the sales team, help uncover their self-limiting beliefs, help shine lights on their blind spots, help them understand why they deserve to be paid for value rooted in the value that they deliver. And when we started adding that training to the strategy, the results shot through the roof. And so we did that for a period of time. And after a while, I started to wonder how much of the benefit was really rooted in the mindset and the belief and the skill versus the math of the model. And so ran an experiment essentially where we just did the training and didn't do the strategy work. And it was 80+% of the benefit. And why that matters from an ROI perspective is that the kind of, companies that you serve and that we serve, it's not like they're sitting around on their extra $15 million to spend, right? Like they have very limited resources, both in terms of the people and the dollars. So they want to spend on something that gives them a very fast ROI that does not consume a lot of time. And big, complicated, expensive strategy projects are just that, big, complicated, and expensive versus if you can get your team trained in an afternoon or over the course of a 2-month program, for example, and that generates $1 million in benefit for a cost that's a tiny fraction of that, then that's a much more compelling ROI. It's also a lot more fun for me. I love doing it.
Yeah. And I think, your insight, also just knowing what I know about the market for pricing consultants, the vast majority of them are focused on what you just talked about. And it is expensive in the sense that it is very labor intensive to do the research necessary to, with an empirical level of accuracy that is reasonable, collect enough data to figure out this is sort of the ideal price point for the different segments that you sell to and all of those things. Knowing that most people are going to get reasonably close to that without much or any of that process. And then to your point, what does it matter if they don't actually go out and get any of the value from it? So let's talk about that. Why is it that so many people, even after realizing they need to charge more, even after having a lot of empirical support that that's the appropriate amount to be charging, still struggle to go to market with that increased pricing?
I think there's a lot of reasons for that, and I will broadly break it into two. One is where their heart is and isn't, and the second is fear. So the first is where the heart is or isn't. Let's imagine you're an agency owner. You did not start the agency because you're so psyched about having constant price negotiations. It's not why you went into the business. That is not the fun part of the business. You love your craft. You love the creative pursuit. You love solving problems. You love PR or web development or digital marketing or whatever it is that you love. And that's why you do it. And you've built an agency around that. And the selling and the negotiation is a necessary evil to get back to doing the fun stuff, which is doing the work. And so one of the reasons that companies struggle to make more money with pricing is fundamentally a lack of focus on it. They're so focused on selling and serving the customers all the time that the thing that gets the least focus and attention is, are we actually getting paid well for it? So the first is really just like, give it a seat at the table. Under the adage of what gets measured gets done, the very fact of shining a light on this changes behavior, which changes results. And so an easy action item on this is have a strategic pricing meeting once a quarter. Have one every quarter, even if you're not contemplating a price increase, even if you don't know what you're going to talk about, sit down with your key leaders. And if your key leader is you, sit down with yourself once a quarter for 90 minutes and think about your pricing strategy. And is it on track? And do we think there's an opportunity here? The second big chunk of why this is hard is people are afraid. I think they're afraid of not knowing. They don't really know how much they could charge or should charge. I think the not knowing is rooted in, I don't know what my competitors are doing. Sometimes that's a question we get when somebody gets on the phone with me and they want to know what we do and how we do it. And they say, "Oh, do you go gather competitive intel to help us, figure this out?" And I say, no. By the way, really good market research is expensive because it's time consuming, and it could cost you $50,000 or $100,000, maybe less. But let me save you 50 grand. Some of your competitors are more expensive than you, and some of them are less expensive than you. How does that affect your pricing strategy, right? Like we because we're not lovers of pricing, we want more and more and more information to make us feel better about the quality of our decision. And the fact is we don't know, we're not going to know. But I want to hit on something that you said that I think is important. These folks that run these businesses have a really good idea. Is it perfect knowledge? No, but they're 80%. Like if I asked you in your gut, Miss Agency owner, what do you think? Do you think you're leaving money on the table? Yeah, I do. Where do you think you could be and still be competitive given the value that you deliver? I think I could probably be, probably 10 or 15% higher. I'll tell you what, I would put chips on the table that agency owner's right. The gut feel of these people rooted in their expertise in their products and services and their customers and their competition is good enough. Trust your gut instinct and then get executing. And this is the last bit of the price piece. So even if we knew the perfect price, which by the way does not exist, you could spend $100,000 on perfect market intel and you're going to know that some people are cheaper and some are more. You're still going to have to make a decision at the end of the day that this is what I'm going to charge. Once you've decided that, how do you communicate it and defend it in the market? And there's so much fear around losing business over pricing that even if we've talked ourselves into, okay, we're going to charge $180 an hour, or we're going to charge $7,000 a month for this kind of service, like the second we're sitting down with the customer, many of us are pre-discounting in our head, or we're negotiating against ourselves. Or the second we say it's $7,000 a month and the customer says, "Oh, I've been paying my last agency $5,000 a month." We jump straight to discounting because we're making so many of those decisions from fear.
It's just an anecdote. It's so funny that you mentioned it. I've had this experience. I remember this one time I was buying flooring and I went to a discount floor place and we saw the floor that we wanted. We talked to the salesperson. We said, we want, whatever amount of square feet of this floor. He goes, "Great. Let me go get you a quote." He comes back. He hands me the quote and he's like, "Here's your quote for this amount of flooring." And I knocked 15% off of it for you. And I was like, why? I was going to buy it at this price, but thank you, I guess. And it was just like kind of crazy. Right. But this happens. And I'm guilty of having done this in the past. So So with all of that, Casey, you've touched on the not giving it a seat at the table. You've touched on the pricing meter. I want to come back to that. I want to double click on it for just a second. If someone's having their first quarterly pricing meeting, you mentioned like you might not even really know what you're going to talk about. What is sort of a loose agenda or some key questions that you might ask yourself to stimulate that conversation, make sure you're getting the intended outcome out of that time every quarter?
Yeah, great. And can I ask, do you do show notes for the podcast?
We
Because
do, and we can put resources in there for sure.
great, because I have a sort of a guide of if we're going to start to do pricing meetings, pricing reviews inside our firm, what should an agenda look like? And the answer is it evolves over time, because at the very beginning, you've never talked about this in this structured way before. And so some of it is sort of just standing up the structure. But over time, it's essentially, having a long view out into the marketplace and asking what's changing, what's new, what's different. Is this a time for us to reevaluate our pricing, either because of what's happening with costs, or because of what's happening with competition, or because market demand is shifting, and or other external factors, like, for example, how disruptive AI is being in the world. Like, are there things going on that cause us to have to take another look at our pricing? And very often that can have not just a pricing effect, but sort of a go to market. It's a good chance to ask ourselves, is the way we're going to market still the most valuable? Do we need to start to put some things in place to make sure that 3 months from now, 6 months from now, a year from now, we're still very valuable? And so pricing and go to market kind of get schmurgled together a little bit with that long view. I also think, talking about what are we measuring? Are we measuring enough of the right things to get leading indicators for pricing opportunities? And here's an example. Most businesses are measuring profitability in some form or fashion, ideally at a customer level, but if not at an agency level. How is that changing over time is one very obvious and key metric. And that can be changing because of price. It can be changing because of mix. It can be changing because of cost. So do we understand what role pricing is having in our margin? Those kind of measurements are valuable. But I also think things like what's happening with our win rate. Is our win rate starting to tick down or tick up? If we're winning, and not just at a macro level, but maybe at a more granular level. So we are, our win rate's been about 60% for web design, and it's still about there. But we're finding that for email, nurture campaign, copywriting, our win rate has taken a nosedive in the past 3 months. Okay, well, what are we going to do about that? So it's really about data review as well. What do we measure? And then how do we look at it especially from a trends perspective or an exception management perspective, that can be leading indicators to us of something changing? Because you don't want to wait till it shows up in your margin. That's looking in the rearview mirror. How can you look out front? I think also planning for some execution. So if you do have a price increase on the horizon, what are the steps that need to be taken? You need to be gathering and planning for the communication with your customers. You need to be gathering and planning for communication with your team. I think very often when companies do price increases, they really spend most of their time thinking about when and how much, and not enough time about how to talk about it. And I always find that really fascinating in the agency space, because these are people who are masters of communication, but that gets the least focus and attention very often. We have to think about how to message it internally and externally, and how can we arm, if it's not my job as the agency owner to go out and have every one of these conversations, how do I make sure the members of my team are equally equipped with the skills and the confidence to communicate this and defend this in a way that isn't apologist or wringing hands or holding our hat in our hand, begging to, this is totally fair, reasonable, and appropriate to ask for more money for the value that we deliver, and really shifting from a place of fear to a place of confidence. Those are the types of things that you could have on an agenda for a quarterly meeting.
Excellent stuff. And we'll have a link to that guide in the show notes. And you touched on a bunch of things that I think are really important in terms of having leading indicators, right? So one of the things that we like to encourage clients to pay attention to is, how is your planned margin or planned average billable rate changing over time? Right. So that's a strong indicator of like, are we doing a better job of pricing up front? And it sort of separates that from the question of, how is the delivery going downstream, which is somewhat of a separate issue, related, but not necessarily the same. Another, I think, a really important factor here for that conversation is utilization, right? Are we busy? Are we not busy? But then also sort of, how is our staffing strategy changing going forward? Are we going to use more of a lagging staffing model, which means that We can be a little bit more aggressive about pricing because we're not constantly going to be trying to like fill up additional capacity that maybe we're opening up to maximize growth. Or are we using more of a leading staffing model where we're hiring out a little bit ahead of where we are, where we're going to be less willing to lose opportunities? We're going to be focused more on closing absolute work. Like that is honestly one of the biggest things that you can do as a firm to put the pricing increase sort of conversation in your advantage, is to be in a place where you're busy and you don't need new work.
100%. I want to offer a caution. I 100% agree with every single word you said. A caution that I would offer, or maybe it's a piece of advice. When you're sitting in a position of either current excess utilization, you have unused capacity right now, or you're forecasting that you will soon, it is too seductive of a lever to start using pricing as the way to solve that problem. And it is a lever. It is a tool that you can use to close business faster. It is not the only, and I would argue it should not be the first. I find that companies are too quick, especially when they start staring down the barrel of excess capacity, to rush out with pricing as their, it's like if they're going golfing, they got one club in the bag and it's a driver. And it's like, well, look, we need some other clubs. And I challenge people with the following very simple homework. Lock yourself and your key leaders in a room with no technology for 2 hours, and nobody leaves until we come up with 5 ideas to generate business and close the capacity gap. And none of those ideas can be, let's do it for cheaper. The reason I suggest that, I mean, you'll be climbing the walls after 30 minutes, you're out of ideas, but you cannot get creative about an out-of-the-box solution if the most obvious, easiest answer is staring straight in your face. And so I don't disagree that when we're busy, we are naturally more comfortable and confident with holding the line on price. That is true. But when we are not busy, let's not rush to price as the solution. Not that I think that's what you're suggesting, but I can't let it go unsaid.
Yeah. I totally agree with what you're saying, Casey. And I think this is especially true for the firms that have a recurring component to their business. They do like retained work. This is the path to what I call like systemic indigestion. And we've seen it time and time again where you keep filling up your excess capacity with low quality work. And this is especially prevalent in firms that don't have a client level profitability view. And I mean, man, we've found clients that we'd look at some of their worst clients, often the ones that were paying them the highest dollar amount. And they were literally paying to work with their clients every month in terms of the labor costs that went in relative to what they're getting paid. And so this is why they felt like the bigger we get, the less cash flow we have. And it's like, yeah, because you just keep throwing more people at this indigestion problem that was often created by taking on deals that you really shouldn't have at times where you were desperate. So I'm totally on board with what you're saying there, Casey. And what you've started to allude to is sort of the next piece, which is, yeah, how do you actually have that conversation, both with new clients and existing clients? I think that's sort of the meat of it. So what is your framework for thinking through how to actually get the messaging, the confidence right to go out and make this happen?
Well, I think we can break it into 2 different kinds of conversations. One is pricing with new customers, and the other is pricing where we're talking about basically an increase and we're changing something about what they're paying us today. And those are often conflated in people's minds when they think about doing a price increase, because they're going to take that new price to existing customers and they're going to take it to new customers. Why I draw that distinction is it's very often overly limiting for us when we're making decisions about our price increase, when we're too heavily thinking about our existing client base. We might think of that 1 or 2 or 3 very large clients that make up a large percentage of our revenue, and we imagine how poorly they're going to take the price increase conversation. And that can cause us to really back off from pricing where we know we should be. And so if we should buy, if we were going to take a view that ignored those 3 customers and said, how much should we go up right now? And we take a hard look at our value and what's happening in the market. And we think, well, we could probably do a 15 or 20% price increase. But those 3, and we imagine what that would look like, and it would be a, a bloodbath, we can't do it, then that causes us to back those targets way back down. And now all of a sudden we're asking for 4% or 7% because of the three. And so this is a case for a segmented approach to pricing. So that, we establish new standard pricing, and that's what we go to market with for all new business. We also take a look at our existing customer base, and we sort of do some kind of scoring. It doesn't have to be anything fancy. It could be as simple as red, yellow, green in terms of risk to our business if they're to flee, or the stickiness of the customer, or a combination thereof. And you say, okay, if they're really small and they're really sticky, they get the new price, and we let it fly, and we're not going to worry too much if one or two customers leave. They probably won't, but and then how do we make sure we're really, really guarding and really careful around those very large, very aggressive, very sensitive customers? And so the reason I mention all that as it relates to a price increase structure is that the exact same thing should be true for communication. How much and how and what we communicate should be very different depending on which bucket we're in. And I would say a common mistake I see around price increase time is over communication. We give too much detail. We over explain. We are in an apologist kind of mindset where we feel like we have to justify and over explain. And I think we make the problem worse, not better, when we over explain. It's interesting. If I were to say to you, like, say I was your internet service provider, and I said, Marcel, your internet bill is going to go up by $2 a month starting next month. And I just wanted to see if Tuesday was a good day for me to stop by and have a conversation with you about that and hear what you think about your internet bill going up by $2 a month. And while I have you on the phone, do you like it? Are you happy with that? No, I'm not happy with that. In other words, given a forum to complain, customers will. Given a forum to be upset about pricing, they will. So where is that forum unnecessary to give? If you're charging something, $2 a month for something, maybe there's not even a notification necessary. If they're paying $200,000 a month, now it's a different ballgame. But I think very thoughtfully segmented communications and making sure we are not over explaining. So good price increase communication is brief, personal in tone, legally compliant, and unapologetic. And I would say that it justifies not just based on what's happening with cost, but also what's happening based in value.
Do you want some free resources to help you measure and improve your profitability? If you do, then I want to tell you about our agency profitability toolkit, which you can grab absolutely free in the show notes or by heading to parakeeto.com/toolkit. It's packed with training videos, cheat sheets, templates, and all kinds of other great resources to help you start measuring and improving the essential metrics that are going to drive better profitability in your business. And it's helped thousands of other agencies around the world do the same. So I want to encourage you to go and grab a copy of that. And if you'd rather get in the fast lane and just have our team of experts guide you through the process of measuring and improving your profitability, then I want to encourage you to apply for a consultation at parakeeto.com. With that, I want to thank you again for tuning in. I hope you enjoy the episode, and I'll let you get back to it. Okay, let's dive into each of these. I think starting with the new business conversation, one of the things that you mentioned towards the top of the episode was, you land on this great new pricing strategy, and then on the front line in sales, it's just no one's getting their head around it. They don't believe in it. They have their tail between their legs when they're going into these client conversations. So let's start there. What are some of the best practices for making sure that this gets to the front line with a high degree of confidence?
I think making sure that the folks in the front line are deeply connected to and understand the true value of what we deliver, and not in a like, here's the talking points, but in terms of like the real value of that. And so if they're getting ready to go have a sales conversation with a customer and propose a service that is X dollars per hour or X dollars per month, that if they deeply understand that the value to that business of hiring that firm is 10x that, then that's a lot easier conversation to have. And so a real understanding of the value, and not just the value in a general sense, but in a very specific sense, specific to this customer and specific to this problem this customer is trying to solve. By the way, we cannot sell very well if we don't understand that anyway, much less the pricing problem, right? We've got to be able to consultatively sell and connect with the needs of the customer. So one is deep understanding and connection with the value. The second is really simple, but is like almost never done, which is enough preparation on it. Like really preparing And I mean things like practicing saying this stuff out loud. Like when I tell them the price tag, this is what I'm going to say. Somebody once told me, like if you ask the area code of my phone number, it's 614. Is that too high or is that too low? Is 614 too much or too little? It doesn't mean anything. Like 614 is not high or low because it's an area code. It doesn't matter. It's a useful thought experiment to, if we could deliver our price with as much emotion as we delivered our area code or our zip code, like it doesn't matter what that number is. Now, I think that's aspirationally, probably a little bit unrealistic, but I think it's a useful thought exercise. Like we have a lot of emotion in that number. If we always charge $3,000 a month for something and now we're charging $5,000, we're really stressed out about that, but the new customer doesn't know that. So the question is, if we understand that we're charging $5,000 for this, but the customer gets $50,000 worth of benefit, great. That's step one. Step two is, how do I talk about this? How do I present it? And I'm going to grab my manager, or I'm going to grab a peer, or I'm going to stand in front of the mirror, and I'm going to say out loud how I'm going to talk about this with the customer. And then, this is the important bit, I'm going to prepare for all the things they might say. That's too much. Oh, that sounds good. That's more than we paid our last firm. That's outside our budget. We're going to brainstorm all the ways that they could object to it, and we're going to be ready for those in response. And we're going to practice that out loud too. And then not everything happens out loud. Some things are over Zoom or in person. Some things are over email or through an RFP process. So you tune this accordingly, but we're spending so much time figuring out what the service should be that we should present to them and what number should go on it. The thing that's getting the least focus and attention is, how do we communicate it with confidence?
Totally aligned with everything that you just touched on. One of the nuances that I also want to double click on here that I find is really important is understanding the mechanics of the contract. This is especially important in professional services where, like, are you selling time? Are you selling deliverables? Are you selling an outcome? Like, when you look at the actual contract that the client signs, what is the relationship between the dollars that they've paid you and the thing that's being promised in the contract? And this seems like it's not really that important for the sales conversation, but like we ourselves experienced this at Parakeeto, where we made some changes to our pricing and packaging, and we didn't spend enough time really getting aligned as a team on how that had shifted. And we actually, unbeknownst to me, we went like 3 months without actually effectuating the pricing change because we had a person on the team that hadn't figured out how to like answer the question from the client of, well, what is this, like, what is this for? And what is this for? And like the monthly fee, what is that? What's included in that? What's the upfront fee? And it's like, he was totally confused, and that was on me, right, for not having like really sat down and said, okay, let's work through this. So I totally agree that the role playing is so important, and then the support on when this makes contact in the wild, all the new stuff you couldn't anticipate in role playing, and having a forum to be able to address those things and build that muscle, I think is super critical.
One of the things I want to say about the example you just went through is this question of like, what's the unit of measure, right? Like, what are they buying? They're spending X dollars for what thing, what set of hours, what deliverable, what outcome, whatever, right? And the degree to which what they buy is very directly tied to value that they experience, the higher our prices can be. So this is a simple reason why, in general, if a project can be well scoped, I'm in favor of fixed fee over selling time, because they pay a fixed fee for a certain outcome, and it's a predictable thing that they can pay for a predictable outcome. That is generally a way to make more money than if you say, we're going to do 16 hours of this. Like 16 hours of your time does not have a very straight, direct line to a certain outcome for them necessarily, or you're asking them to take the leap with you, which for existing customers may be fine, but for brand new customers, I think that tying the unit of measure as closely as possible to value makes the sale easier and makes it easier to prop your price up.
Yes, agreed. And the asterisk that you added to the front of that, which is so important, is if the project can be scoped, right? For more on this, check the agency pricing quadrant, a link to that in the show notes. But I totally agree. And then again, to come back to that other point, making sure your team knows how to have that conversation and engage in the jujitsu match that clients often want to pull you into when you move to a value or flat rate pricing, which is the last few questions, like how many hours do we get for that? How long? They'll try to sort of bait you into talking about whatever pricing model they want you to use. And, you just need to practice having that conversation and train the team on it too.
100%. I like giving this advice, especially if you're moving that unit of measure. If you're moving from a time-based approach to more of a value or outcome-based approach, if people are used to buying it, or even if you're not, but you're selling to a customer that's always bought time and they're buying from you and they're not used to buying and they're trying to, like you said, back you into those conversations, recognize that that is largely a tactic that arms the seller to beat you up. It's a tactic, or sorry, the buyer. It is a tactic that favors the buyer. The more transparency and detail unnecessarily that you hand to them, that is just like loading up their weapons. That's loading up their toolkit with more tools they can use to beat you up. So that said, they're still going to ask. So the question is, how can you tee up your pricing model and what you do share with them as an advantage to the customer? And I have, here's a simple example. If you've moved from time to value, say, well, one of the things, we've charged time-based projects in the past, and one of the things that we saw is that really hampers collaboration. You're afraid to ask for a 30-minute meeting because you don't want to pay for that time, even though that 30-minute meeting would actually help us a lot be really aligned on this new wrinkle that emerged in the project. And when we don't bill for time, that we find that actually encourages more and more collaboration. So in other words, don't talk about why it's good for you not to sell time. Talk about why it's good for them not to buy time. It's always a what's in it for them kind of conversation. And if you can do this successfully, you can usually shut down those kinds of attempts to pigeonhole you into the wrong kind of information.
I'm so glad you brought that up, because this is, there's another billing model that I really like for engineering firms, especially that are doing very high risk, very complex stuff that can't be scoped. And I call this abstracted time materials. So they're selling like a cross-functional team for large swaths of time. Like this team is 40 grand per 2-week sprint. It's a very sort of, so you have the benefits of the risk mitigation of time, but you're still capturing some additional value. You can still get paid to be efficient. And that's the objection that I get, is like, how do I get a client to buy that? And my answer is always, you have to sell the methodology first. And then this is just you saying, okay, well, in order for us to work in this way that we both agree is better for the engagement and our success, here's a contract structure that enables us to work in that way and doesn't actually get in the way of us doing this. And so like, I love that you brought that up for the other side of the equation, which is like sell the methodology that then a flat fee or a value-based price enables. Yeah, awesome stuff.
It's like somebody on your team coming to you and saying, Marcel, I want to raise. And you say, okay, tell me more. And they say, well, I really want to buy a boat. Like, this is a terrible reason to get raised. Like, tell me why I should value you higher. Like, tell me what you're doing for me and how that helps me. And then we can talk about it. Right. So I think we want to always be thinking about our communication and this goes for price increases. This goes for structures. This goes for proposals. This goes for conversations, objection handling. How do I put this in a language that's rooted in value for the customer? If I always focus on value, that is going to ultimately minimize the amount of price objections I get and maximize the number of profitable deals I can win.
All right. Now, I'd be remiss if we didn't touch on the scariest part of all of this, I think, for most of the people listening, which is that client that's been around for a long time, and we now have to consider going and changing their price, asking for more money. What are your sort of frameworks for approaching that conversation in a way that sets everyone up for success?
I think it's a little bit depends on how long they've been stuck. I have met, and I'm sure you have too, plenty of professional service firms that have customers that they haven't touched the pricing since they became a customer. And it might be 5 or 7 or 10 or 12 years. And their price that they are paying is so criminally below the market price. I would say that very often there's you have to ask yourself, if this is really still business that you want? If it is, it's probably unrealistic to eat that whole apple in one bite, meaning jump them from where they are to where the rest of the market is. And so I would suggest that there's a way to lay out a multi-step plan with that customer that you can tee it up as if it's preferential. And here's an example of what I'm talking about. So, new clients coming into our firm are paying $220 an hour. We still have you at $120, which is the price you started paying us, 7 years ago when you came on board. This is not tenable for us. And by that, I mean, we cannot deliver the level of quality and service and excellence you've come to count on from our firm at that price tag. I don't expect you to go to $220 tomorrow. That isn't reasonable for you. We've developed and I'm making this up. I would probably clean up the language of this, but in recognition of our longstanding partnership and relationship, we will continue to extend preferred pricing of $170 an hour for the next 8 months, at which point then or next 6 months, next 12 months, whatever, at which point there will be another move towards 220 at that time. Do you have any questions about this that I can answer? Don't go into 17 years worth of explanations. Keep it simple. Tee it up as if it's an advantage to them. And by advantage, I mean you're getting preferred pricing. And we're recognizing that this big jump isn't good news at this time. If it's less dramatic than that, I wouldn't think of it as any different than any other price increase, with the exception of if you are, by less dramatic in that, I mean, they haven't done an increase in a year. And, if they're one of your very biggest customers, if you have a customer that's 40% of your revenue and you're scared out of your mind that if you hold the line on price that they're actually going to leave, then you have some business decisions to make. I think there are ways to tee up price increases that you can still back down from if it comes to it. I don't ever like giving a business owner advice like, hey, your value's there. Tell them this is the price, take it or leave it. Like, I'm not the one that has to live with that loss, right? They do. And so I recognize that there are times that the risk posed to our business of a customer loss, I won't say they outweigh the value of a price increase, but they give it a run for its money. And so I would certainly be cautious, careful, and prepared for those conversations. The biggest issue I see is not that people don't know what to do with those customers. It's that they let those customers lower the bar on what they ask everywhere else. That the most price sensitive customers, the biggest bullies, the squeakiest wheels, set our mental ceiling for what we can charge. And it's like, no, that's what we can charge this one bully, but we can charge everybody else a more appropriate rate for the value that we deliver.
All incredible advice. I have some things that I've heard and maybe tried that I'd love to get your take on. One of those is it comes from the SaaS world where everything is subscription based. And one of the things that is a common practice there is repackaging as a way of repricing. So this is like a little bit interesting, but it's like, hey, the thing that you were on, this works well if you have very productized retainer services, but it's like, hey, the package you were on doesn't exist anymore. We now have these new packages, so you just need to pick a new one. And it just so happens that the margin on the one that's more expensive and less expensive is better for you, but it's just like, so that's one way of doing it. So that's a tactic I found is kind of interesting. The other one is sort of setting an anchor. This is like, I can't believe I'm pulling a trick out of Donald Trump's book, but it's like, the threat of like, hey, the price is going to go up to this later and you can get a discount on that. That's still more than what you're paying now in exchange for a commitment by renewing your contract, let's say, and pushing it out or something like that. So using sort of commitment as a trading block there. And, we've always talked about this 3 R's framework, especially for retained work, where it's like recapture. So like, is there work you're doing that you're just not being paid for? Can you go to the client, get that included in the scope? If you bill on time, that's really more about that conversation. There's rescope, which is if they won't pay you more, can you right size the scope to what they are paying you? And then the third R would be replace, which is, can you get to a point where you're really busy, you bring in a higher quality client that is paying you more, and then you use that as leverage to renegotiate with the client. And even if they do leave, then at least you've avoided hiring more people and you've increased your revenue and your profit without changing the size of your team, which is kind of the best case scenario if you are going to have a client leave the firm.
I love the first and third of those more. I think all three of them are really versions of right sizing value to price. Your price has gotten out of sync with the value, and we've got to right size it. And that can be done through a rescoping or a repackaging or a variety. The second one of those ostensibly is right sizing for value, because if I can secure a commitment, that's right. That's why it's right sized at a lower price. The only thing I don't love about the second one, and maybe this is an unreasonable sensitivity I have, but I hate something that looks gimmicky in the B2B space, especially in professional services, which, engineering firms, law firms, even SaaS companies to a degree, depending on who they serve, agencies. If you are selling expertise, I would be really careful about things that might look like a pricing gimmick. Like if you sign this today, you can avoid this higher price later. That can be done well, but it can also be done like, and you'll also get these two Ginsu knives, like it just, and I think it cheapens expertise when we start playing pricing games. And I think we all know what it feels like that somebody's playing a game with us. So I would just be very careful with any structures or offers that, like, I've thought through how to make sure this doesn't damage my reputation or standing in the customer's eyes as a deep expert in something really valuable. Because as soon as we're like in wheeling and dealing mode, I think it cheapens it.
All excellent advice. I have one last question for you if you have the time for it, Casey, because I think it's actually I have two, but I'll start with the one that is a bit of a selfish question. We, after many, many years of not publishing our pricing, published a pricing on our website. And our personal experience has been really positive with that. Actually, we found that it's shortened our sales cycle. It's attracted, better clients. We've actually had a higher conversion from people coming to the website and actually scheduling calls with us. But of course, we have a very specific context, which is not the same as every other B2B service provider. What is your take on sort of public pricing and how you think about whether or not that might be worth experimenting with for a firm?
It's I'm a consultant, so of course I'm going to use it depends at least once on this podcast, and this is the time. It depends, and let me add a little more commentary that makes that more clear. So the times that I would advise it are you're getting a lot of inbound leads. You're getting a lot of inbound interest, and you are potentially spending some selling time, disqualifying people out. You can use pricing on your website to take people farther through the buyer journey, and some of them will bounce off naturally when they see that price tag, and that's great because they would get disqualified anyway. But now that you don't have to have that doesn't have to happen through the sales call with Marcel. So that's one example of a time when I would say that's a good way to use pricing as a tool. One concern I have is that sometimes pricing scares people away who actually would be able to pay that price and willing to pay that price if they understood the value better. And so having it on a website relies on the website as the more or less 100% of the way that they determine whether the value is there for them or not. And I think that in a complex sale, depends on what you sell and how complex it is and how clear or difficult it is to help people understand it quickly, that if this such and such service costs $25,000, like that's a lot of money, I'm never going to do that. But if they understood that $25,000 could gain them $500,000 in benefit through a conversation where they more fulsomely understood what the service was and why it was valuable, then I don't want those people to bounce off. And so I don't want them to self-disqualify when in fact they probably would have been a more qualified client. So I think some of it depends on how complex your solution is, and how easy it is to explain and understand. I also think it's there's a element of how big is the dollar value, right? If I can put something $49 in my cart, like I'm going to buy an online course or something, there's no reason to have contact us for pricing, right? But if it's a $50,000 training program, nobody's going to be put that in my cart. That's going to have a sales conversation. So sometimes we can scare people away with our price if we're too transparent with it too early, especially with those bigger price tags. So those are some of the considerations that I think about when somebody says, should we put our pricing on our website? I ask a whole bunch of questions. And then I have an opinion about whether it's a yes or a no. And also I think the world is this is true for not just the question you asked, but really broadly. And it's a nice way to wrap up. The world is your petri dish. There is no right answer to exactly what we should charge or how we should charge it. There's some wrong answers, but there's a bevy of right answers. And nobody, particularly if you sell something differentiated and special, nobody knows what the market will value it at until it's for sale at that price. You can guess at it. You can think about it. You can perseverate on it. You can do some spreadsheet math on it. But until you've tried to charge it, you don't know what the market thinks. And I think the same is true for experiments like how visible do we make our pricing? I'm a big fan of price experimentation as long as that can be done in a way that doesn't tank your business.
Yeah. Casey, we could talk, I'm sure, for many more hours, but unfortunately, we're both busy professionals. I'm sure you have places to be. So for those that want to consume much more of your content and your brilliance, where should we be sending them in the show notes to do that?
So we have a resources section of boostpricing.com. That's where all of our blogs and videos are posted and case studies. And we have some calculator tools that people can use. So anybody who's looking for resources or more of me talking about this topic, that's on the resources section of boostpricing.com. I also put a lot of content out on LinkedIn, and you can find me there, Casey Brown Boost. A couple of videos a week. I write a lot out there. So that's a good place to find content so that you can command the prices you deserve. Also, I have a book. It's called Fearless Pricing. You can find it on Amazon or anywhere books are sold.
Amazing. So in the show notes, we will have links to the pricing meeting structure guide that was mentioned earlier, all the resources on Boost Pricing, Casey's LinkedIn, the book, as well as a few resources from Parakeeto around pricing. So be sure to check those out. And with all of that, Casey, thank you so much for making the time. I really enjoyed this conversation.
It was really fun for me. Thanks, Marcel.
Hey, thanks so much for tuning in to today's episode. I hope you enjoyed it. And if you've ever found yourself thinking, man, I get so much value from this podcast, I wish there was something I could do to return the favor. Well, today's your lucky day because you can leave us a review wherever you're listening to this, and it is incredibly helpful. Of course, if you haven't grabbed a free copy of the Agency Profit Toolkit, go and get that. It's got tons of free resources to help you improve your profitability. If you're looking to get in the fast lane and get help from experts to improve your profitability and measure your most important metrics, then apply for a consultation at parakeeto.com. We'd love to chat with you and figure out how we can help. With all of that, thank you so much for being a listener, and we will see you on the next episode.